Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. A psychologist has observed that more than any other animal, we human beings depend on our ability to learn. Our large brain and powerful learning abilities evolved most of all to deal with change. And so we should be pretty good at change, eh, Nat?
I like that we've started this podcast a little bit more formally than our usual hello, while we are both looking the least formal I've ever seen us look. We're like hunched over in our...
Who are you calling informal?
Well, I walked in and I was like, I look like a sloth. I've given up. And Kristen's like, me too. And then you launched that off sounding like we were like sitting in some fancy pod studio with our fancy pod gear.
Glamorous. We're actually glamorous. We're Monday glam.
We're Monday glam. We're starting the week glam. I agree though, and I love that quote, the psychologist, because it is something that makes us uniquely human. It's that thing, is it The West Wing? My favorite show. Everyone should have that as their favorite show, where they did the thing about why we went to the moon, and they were like, we went to the moon because we could. We want to be bigger and better, and there are some real negative downsides to that as far as, ruining
trade-offs.
The planet. But that is a really cool part of humanity that sets us apart, that we're always aiming to do things bigger and better and differently and learn and evolve. So it's an incredible capability, but it's one that on an individual level can be really hard to do.
So the context of this podcast episode, which is on being a beginner, came from our chats with a number of power suitors who are either promoted into new roles or have started entirely new career paths, and they're dealing with big feelings about being a beginner again.
Yeah, being a beginner can be really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I think I loved in our first interview where we had Rhiannon McKinnon, who is the ex-CEO of one of our big 10 finance firms in New Zealand. Got it working part-time. What a boss. But I loved that her advice was, you'll never be ready for the next job you take on. The job actually is to learn, and that's easier. Like most things, it's easier said than done. But I really like this as an episode because I feel like there are a lot of power suitors who've taken that chance and made that step. And the challenge with that, especially when it relates to your career or anything out of your comfort zone, is you've gotten really, really good at stuff. The reason you've been promoted or the reason you're ready for a step up is you are cruising and you are really nailing what you're up to. And then you put yourself into the next level and suddenly you don't feel like you're nailing anything at all. You feel like you're completely out of your depth. And that is very different.
Yeah. And if you think about going from our teens and our 20s into adulthood, there's always this is what I'm going to do when I grow up, or this is this idea of success I have about myself. And there's so much wrapped up with our self-identities. And once we get there, and human beings love to feel respected. We love knowing things. We love adding value, and we love having people come to us, because then that is actually a signal of us adding value. We can help, we can contribute. And when you're a beginner again, you're setting yourself back, sometimes
it feels
decades.
Like you are. Yeah.
Where it can, even just for a short period when you're learning and getting up to speed with that newest thing, it's uncomfortable. That's the only way I can describe it. It's
when you
uncomfortable.
sort of go from having people come to you having to go to other people, and we all struggle to ask for help. And I've noticed that in particular at my house recently, with people going through a few medical issues, and they're all really struggling to ask for help and accept help. And you just think it's just something that we don't tend to do, and especially if you've been really incredibly good at what you've done in the past. And I got this advice years ago when I did some leadership training, and she said, and this is actually like something we talk about a lot at PowerSuit, you often get promoted to a new role because you are really, really good at what you used to do. And what we tend to go into that with is the expectation that we are meant to be great at the next thing. And what we actually should do is completely reverse that mindset and embrace being a beginner again. And I have always carried that with me, because I just feel like when you have that mindset, you have a totally different approach to how you think about learning and what your goals are for your job.
And the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with that feeling of being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're going to chat in 2 parts in this episode. And the first will be, I suppose we want to introduce this concept of that there are actually a lot of downsides to being an expert. So we can set the scene for the second part of the episode, which is how incredible being a beginner is.
And I think it's not just being an expert, it's not getting out of your comfort zone. There are huge downsides to that. And I first heard about the concept of growth mindset, funnily enough, with a bunch of teenage girls who were learning how to ride mountain bikes. And I have some great friends who were taking all sorts of coaching to these groups of young kids, and they were the epitome of growth mindset. Like, mountain biking is terrifying, but they would just pick it up and do it. And, you know, there's a lot of gender norms when it comes to mountain biking, and their parents would treat their children differently based on gender. And these coaches did a whole job around, no, you should believe that you can do this and take it step by step. So I really love that mindset. And what it does is unlock a lot of opportunities, and we joke about it a bit, but you know, we talk about things like going to karaoke or playing golf or going climbing, and we've been offered all those opportunities in the last couple of months. And I think both of us start with like a and then we both go, well, why not? You know, like those are all sorts of things that you immediately get that gut reaction of like, I haven't done it before, or I'm not going to be any good at it, or who's going to be there and how's it going to go. And that is the time exactly where you're like, if I stay out of that, I'm staying stuck in this comfort zone. That means I'm missing out on all of that.
Yeah, and I think living in our comfort zones can be really dissatisfying. You hear a lot of people complain when you're like, what's going on? What's new? It's like, oh, you know, the usual. And you know you're in a routine. You're waking up every day and you're just in a bit of a routine, and that can be dissatisfying.
It's so triggering to me. I've lived in my house now for 13 years, and I have this real fear of being someone who lives in the same house forever, because my identity is wrapped around being really comfortable with change. My internal one, I don't care about personal brand on this, but being in the same house is really threatening to me. Of like, am I someone who's afraid to move and start again and try new things? It's really playing on my mind at the moment.
Wow, that's so funny.
But it is. I think we should be afraid of things staying still, because things staying, we've got 120 years on this planet, if that, and you want to spend that time experiencing everything as much as you can. Like, obviously there's things, I don't want to go down to the bottom of the ocean or to the moon, but within reason there is so much to experience. And when it comes to careers, and I know a lot of people talk about that whole deathbed analogy of like, you don't ever look back from your deathbed and think, I wish I worked more. But I do think that's kind of slightly incorrect, because I think I would hate to look back and think I didn't say yes to more opportunities and to really have the career that I really loved.
That's a big one, by the way. The number one, and this came from, I think, interviews with end of care nurses, and they mentioned that the number one, there were 2. The number one regret is I didn't take enough risks in my life.
Yeah.
And number 2 is I didn't spend enough time with friends and family.
Yeah.
Like meaningful time, mindful time.
Everyone should start a podcast and a company together, because then you're in each other's pockets all the time. And you got to quiz nights just to fill in the extra time.
We did do quiz night last night, and we came 12th out of 16, but I was equally impressed with some of the things we knew.
Yeah, we were way smarter than we expected.
Boom, boom.
Yeah, but there were no actual fights when we disagreed on answers, and then invariably one of us was wrong in the team of 4. Yeah. I think we navigated those high intensity situations really well as a team.
We did great. But it's funny, I've made a few career changes and when I say career changes, I mean entirely new sectors. You know how some people start in electricity and they're in electricity for their entire lives? I've made complete domain changes in my life, and where that lands me is being the beginner in the room. And what I've noticed is that the experts in the room, they lack creativity and lack openness, and I've had direct experiences with that. And we've probably mentioned on this podcast this concept of the no people. And when you're coming in and you're trying to make change, you're trying to change the status quo, trying to change the way people do things. And if you raise an idea, you'll invariably get, oh no, we've tried that before and it didn't work. And you get these no people.
And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because we all know that in our own lives, if you've done something for a long time, you actually stop thinking about it. You put it on autopilot a bit. And whether or not you're intentionally doing that in your career, someone coming in, you can always tell someone who's coming in motivated and inspired has a million different ideas and different ways of looking at things, which is what we are doing when we are beginners again. So I wonder if we want to switch to part 2, which is the benefits of being a beginner, or what it hones in you.
We can, but I just want to read a few quotes.
Oh, okay, sorry. Quotes time. Quotes corner.
Actually, this isn't quotes, but this is interesting research. And it's called the candle problem, where people were asked to attach a candle to the wall using nothing more than a box of matches and a box of tacks. Adults struggled to solve this problem because of what's called functional fixedness. Like, we have this concept of what a box is for and what it does, and what tacks do and what matches do.
So effectively, we are constrained by having too much knowledge. We have an idea of what all these things are designed for, and we really struggle to get out of that concept.
Yes.
So we are looking at those things and going, do I tack the candle to the wall? Do I mount the candle with the matches? Like,
yeah, like
we're
it's like
stuck
tacks,
on the things that we know.
Yeah, like tacks are for this purpose and the box is for this purpose. Where they brought children into this scenario and they have a beginner's mindset. They are open to a world of possibilities, and they see they're I suppose less burdened with preconceptions and past experiences of what that tool is for, what this does, and how you're supposed to do this. So they were more likely to try new things in order to attach the candle to the wall, like using a box as a shelf instead of using it as a box, for example.
That's a great solution.
Well, when I read this, I was like, I'd light the candle with the match, and then I would have the wax strip on the wall.
Yeah, that's what I thought I'd do too.
Oh, well, maybe we're
actually 5-year-olds. We're fine. But I do like this, and if you haven't read our newsletter from last week, I believe it was, on experimental mindset, we have an article on our website about that sort of same approach of really embracing this idea of experimentation and trying new things. And that is particularly true when you take that beginner's mindset, because you're not trying to prove you know everything. You're just trying to learn and figure out what works and what doesn't work. And I love that as an analogy / research, because it's such a stark contrast and such a great example of knowing too much sometimes can hold you back.
You know how is it an efficiency thing where we learn to do something, we learn to cut the corners, and so there's a really simple one way of doing it. Whereas if you think about real innovators and entrepreneurs, they're like, how might I completely redefine this whole thing? Yeah, they challenge everything.
And I think that is where our brains are designed to put shortcuts in, because the amount of information we have to bring in all day, every day means we couldn't function otherwise. So our brains are working against us sometimes on the stuff around being a beginner again, because it wants to go straight to what's the solution, get it done, autopilot it, and free up some hard drive.
Yes, exactly. So we now know that being a beginner can bring real joy, freshness of perspective, and reinvigorate.
And some of the other benefits, because now we will switch to part 2, is effectively you're going to have the same experience. Like if you go for a promotion, if you change careers, if you try something new, you're going to do it anyway. It's just that if you switch your mindset to embracing being a beginner, you're going to be much more successful at it, and you're going to enjoy it a lot more.
This is important because a few of the conversations I've had is people are uncomfortable in this state. And that's fair, because you've gone from being the expert into the room to being the learner, and you just want to so quickly, you know, when you get somewhere and try something new and your ultimate goal is to be or look or do what that person does, because you're like, it's so effortless and they're so amazing and they're so smart and they're so good at the thing, and you want to get there, and there's a real sense of impatience in order to do that.
You can see where you want to be, and you're behind where you want to be.
Yeah, it's annoying, especially if they're younger or they're this or they're that. There's this concept.
Or you're trying to hit a golf ball and you see everyone else hitting it up in the air and you can't hit it up in the air, and you're like, I'm swinging the thing. Why does it not work?
Yeah, so there can be frustration, there can be discomfort, and they just want to speed through this beginner phase. But we are actually saying, let's embrace it and enjoy it.
And I think there's a couple of really big things there that I think make it much more powerful to embrace it. I think one of those things is if you redefine success as learning, And that we encourage this across the board with Power Suit, and to stop even trying to look at someone else in the room and think, I want to be like them, and start thinking, we're very much about building your own personal leadership identity and your own brand. Go, how would I like to do this? And the first steps often aren't the final steps. Like if you're heading towards something, let's say golf, for example, to become Lydia Ko, who's a Kiwi, who is a fantastic professional golfer, the things she's working on are very different than the things I need to work on in lesson 1. So my lesson 1 might be learning how to hold the club and learning how to get the stance right. That would be, if I wasn't taking a beginner's mindset, that would feel like a real annoyance, because I'd be like, but I just want to hit it like her. But actually, by recognizing that that's success on day 1 is to just hold the club correctly. And if you relate that to work, on days 1 to 60, 90, for the first 6 months, your goals are very different from what they'll be for the next 6 months. So it could be forming those key relationships. And I think my girlfriend is an absolute expert at this. She spends in new jobs, spends a lot of time trying to figure out who does what actually, like the unofficial, who's the person to go to for this, how do they make decisions, how does this organization actually function, how do people communicate with each other, and really becoming an expert on the system before she worries too much about trying to work within it, because she's like, it's useless. If I start on day 1 trying to influence and change how we do things, and I have no concept of how they currently do it, I'm going to be wildly ineffective. And I've had other friends do the same. If you're in a more senior role, it's about building those really key relationships and making sure you build trust. Like, until you have trust, you're never going to be able to work together as solidly as when you do have trust. So rather than skipping forward and trying to rush that step, by really embracing that step and redefining success, you put yourself like 10 steps further forward than in 6 months' time still banging your head against a wall wondering why no one's going to listen to you and your great ideas.
Many of us will look back on our day or our week and we'll go, did we add value? Because that, again, makes us feel useful, makes us feel good about ourselves. And adding value in this scenario is actually, it's almost, if we have to think of it as a bit of there'll be moments where we add value with our fresh and new perspectives in meetings, and we might bring something from the outside into this new world that we inhabit. But there are also moments where it's not, and we're just banking that. And in order to provide huge value in the future, we have to do these things now.
I think if you've never been on the other side of this and employed people, here's a little secret for you. When we've hired people in the past, there have been so many people who've come in with that attitude of like, I need to hit the ground running and add so much value. And in honesty, they're my worst nightmare. Like, it is so hard to deal with someone when you're like, there is so much you need to learn about this organization and how it functions and who does what, that you coming in all guns blazing is actually a huge distraction, and it takes up huge amounts of my time. Whereas if you are way more comfortable to sit, like, your value is absorbing information, and it may not be that immediate kick, and you may not get that hit of like, I achieved a thing. You are actually adding value though. Whereas doing a bunch of stuff at the start, you may feel like you're adding value, but you actually might be causing mayhem with a lot of other people. No one who hires you, the concept of hitting the ground running is just ridiculous. No one expects it. They know it's impossible. So what they really want from you is for you to embrace a learner's mindset and just learn and get up to speed as quickly as possible. And once you're there, then you're going to smash it. And so that is the expectation they have. So just be aware of that. Like, no one is expecting you to add value, and your ideas of adding value, you may change them completely in 6 months' time because you'll have learned a lot more.
I think the way I approach it when I say yes to new and scary opportunities is because I do, and we've talked about this before, and you do too, we back ourselves to learn.
Yeah.
And the expectation is that we aren't coming in as experts, but we are really comfortable being able to learn on the job.
Like, I think this is one of those examples of be kind to yourself. And if I use a different analogy, I remember moving into my house 13 years ago and immediately wanting to...
Oh my gosh, you're in your house for so long.
I know, I'm one of those people who never changes anything. It's fine. But I moved in and hated the kitchen with a vengeance. You've never seen it. It was brown, it was dark, it was huge, and it was outsized. And the best advice someone gave me is live with it for a year, because the more you live with it, the more you know how you're going to use it. And that's going to mean that when you redesign it in a year's time, you're actually going to redesign what you want. If you did it today, you would design what you think you want, but you actually don't know enough to know what you want yet. And I just think if you apply that to work, and yes, of course, you're going to have great perspectives, and of course, you're going to bring a huge amount more knowledge than you think you know already, because you're probably taking a lot of your knowledge for granted. But it is actually, that's what people want, is to get you to get up and running and know what you need to know as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And I'd like to just have every beginner that is listening to be really careful around the language you use, because you will be struggling a little bit with your personal brand. It's like, this is what I was, but what am I in this context? And we love this idea of your elevator pitch and creating the why you are in a particular meeting and who you are and the value you bring and what you're going to do here. And all too often beginners can be really self-depreciating and go, oh, I'm just this or I'm just that, and use qualifying words or talk themselves down because of it, or that little like, I'm just around figuring everything out, giggle, or whatever. I think this is a really important to your personal brand is still you. Yeah. You are hired for specific skills or strengths. So make sure that you are starting with them, leading with them in every interaction you have. And then just state, it could be a 1, 2, 3 month objective. Be really open about your goals on this learning journey, as opposed to being apologetic about it. So really watch your language and your, not only your outward language and your, I suppose, how you're carrying your body, but also the messages in your head.
When I love that from embracing a beginner's mindset is you are not apologizing, you are embracing it. And there is, I want to say, power move. And I've experienced this a few times where people have come into organizations and they've literally lined up calls with a bunch of people and said, I am here to learn about you, what you do, and absorb as much information. They do it confidently, they do it clearly. And coming from a research background, one other tip is that people love nothing more than to share their value. So if you are going around to people you work with and people you work adjacent to and asking them what they do and how they add value, you will build great friends, you will learn a lot, and you're creating that incredible trust and relationships from day one, and just do it confidently. Like, I think I love that. Really truly embracing a beginner's mindset means not apologizing and not feeling like you're failing, but really recognizing that is the job right now.
And the second one, I just thought of it, is when you pick up on the thing that is weird or feels unnatural, or someone is doing something, in your opinion, strangely or incorrectly, write it down, because they probably are. Like, I think we can fit into a trap of like, that's funny, they think that way, or do that, or do this. And then you're like, but I'm not going to say anything because I'm just new around here. Jot it down, because that's what people need, is for you to point out. Once you're confident and you've built some good relationships, you can actually point out and have a voice in change in that organization.
And I do like the idea of writing it down, because I do feel like, maybe we have different views on this, but I do feel like that first couple of weeks when someone comes in with like, you should change this. And a friend of mine's going through this at the moment, where she's like, oh, there's so much I want to change, but she's writing it all down and building the trust, because she's like, even a week later, this is slightly different than I thought. And I've learned it. And so by keeping that list and building those relationships and backburning some stuff, by the time she, and my girlfriend did exactly the same thing, by the time she had a recommendation, people listened, because they had gone through the knowledge and education, they had supported and worked in the things, and so people trusted that they did know what they were asking to change.
Do not discard that thought. You know, when you get into the new environment and you're like, the emperor is not wearing any clothes, but no one is saying anything, you will just become just like them, which is, we kind of called that the no mindset people. You're the one that can go, hey, you're not wearing any clothes.
And an easy interim solution for that, if it's really driving you bonkers, is to ask questions like, hey, could you explain why we do it this way?
Yeah. Okay, Nat, what are you going to try that's new?
Well, I'm taking up golf.
Oh, you're going to?
I'm going to a 9 and wine to learn how to play golf.
Amazing. I can look back at surfing. That was my new thing about 4 years ago. I think I took that up. And it's been humbling, because I usually pick sports up quite easily, and that's been a really tough and very steep learning curve for me.
I gave up on surfing. Don't have the arms for it.
Yeah, you don't. Well, you say you don't, so I just am copying.
I've had a surf instructor help me for like an hour and eventually be like, you really don't have the body proportions for this.
I got relatively good over a period of 2 years, and then I've really backslid. Oh. Yeah, fear has kind of come into my surfing practice, and so I'm humbled again and kind of on that learning journey, but viewing it as a lifelong. But I guess what I want to try that is new is pickleball. That is something a neighbor up the street is doing, and I would like to try it. So Great. I will report back if I do. This has been a really good podcast, actually, for my attempt at pickleball, because historically I might have shown up, felt a little bit silly, because I know these people have been meeting for over a year now every Wednesday. While I know they're not experts, they're probably proficient at this pickleball, and I won't know anyone. I'll be in a room full of proficient people, and my usual, I suppose, approach might be to be, again, self-depreciating. I might make a few jokes about myself. I might feel a little bit embarrassed. I might apologize a lot. Sorry, if I'm starting to miss or mess things up. So this podcast has been helpful in that I'm going to take a different approach.
I love it. Yeah, because they're wanting, this is one thing I've learned about anyone who invites anyone in outside of work as well. They want you to learn. They want you to be excited about it, and they don't expect you to be an expert. And so I think for them, the greatest gift you can give is to come in enthusiastically and happy. And I always think sometimes saying sorry adds another burden to other people too, because then they have to be like, it's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm excited to hear how that goes.
Yes. And of course, all of these lessons should be applied to career. It's just Nat and I aren't doing a career change at the moment.
I mean, we are learning a lot about sales. We are learning some incredibly new skills.
We're learning a lot. We're in your corner. We know you'll have good days and bad days, but just wake up with a fresh mindset of, I'm going to brace today. I'm going to reset my concept of what success looks like this week, and I'm going to enjoy this period.
And I would actually say we are doing it alongside everyone who's going through that, because we've just launched, and I think we are learning different things every day. We've had to create this thing from scratch, and I think at the moment one of our biggest challenges is trying to hone our messaging so it's really clear to people what we offer. And so you're constantly learning and iterating and mucking up and then dusting yourself off and trying again. True. But it comes in different forms. So we are here with you. Please reach out if you have any questions, or if you want a shoulder to cry on or to vent, because we love to hear from people, and we are more than happy to point you in any direction we know that might be valuable to you.
hello@powersuit.com, and we look forward to connecting, and we'll catch you soon.
Bye.